were invented. I mean, you can go and read those in any of the ancient texts, and I would like to, and I'm going to get back to this later, but whenever you do research about this stuff, I want you to look at the oldest of source materials, because only the oldest of source materials is closer to what actually happened than, you know, if you read something from 2 years ago. Because we are always so smart today. And when we read a text from the 1600s or something like this, and it says something very clear, that something descended from the sky, and then this scientist comes along and says, well, obviously this is a mistranslation. So what they meant is that they were drunk, and while they were smoking a doobie, this all happened in their heads. And that is what science has become today. That, you know, we think that we have all the answers today, when in fact we have none of the answers. And so in the ancient Indian texts, there are these stories of these 3 giant cities that used to orbit the earth. One was made of gold, one was made of silver, and one was made of iron. And from these cities, that's where the quote-unquote gods, by the way, again, gods lowercase g. There never were any real gods. Our ancestors thought that they were gods because they didn't understand the technology behind those visits. And by the way, Arthur C. Clarke did say it best. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So whenever you hear old stories about something happening with magic, look at that story again and think, could it be misunderstood technology? And the answer is yes, of course. No. So from these orbiting space cities, in order to reach Earth, those inhabitants, they used what's called a vimana. And vimanas were these flying machines, or chariots of the gods, that were used as shuttlecraft between orbiting stations and Earth. And we have very concise descriptions in a book, for example, called the Vimanika Shastra, which debunkers will say is null and void because it was only written in the 17th century. And while that is correct, nobody tells you that the texts themselves were written 2,000 years ago, and only in the 17th century somebody actually took the time to compile them all into one book. So, you know, right there, the argument is null and void, because just because somebody finally took the time to do this doesn't mean that those 2,000-year-old texts are wrong. So we have these stories of these vimanas that were extremely technologically advanced, and they describe exactly what they were made of, what some of their propulsion systems were, that you had to wear a specific suits in order to pilot them, and that they could be in 2 places at once, that they had cloaking devices, how they could be made invisible, that they had incredible weaponry with which they had these aerial battles that I was referring to earlier. And at some point, all these cities came together in the firmament, and this giant battle took place, and 2 of these cities were destroyed, and it was clearly described how these cities exploded and all the debris came falling down in a storm of fire. Very vivid descriptions. And so I would urge anyone to go read some of those ancient texts, because it's unbelievable. And by the way, the word viman, still today, in the Hindi language, means airplane. So what we have here is living mythology, where the meaning of the word has never changed. Yet I'm told, oh, that's just coincidence. Screw coincidence. Because after a while, even coincidence no longer makes sense. So all around the world, here we have a painting from ancient China, chariots up in the sky. This is from South America. Again, some type of a city or a house or a palace in the clouds. Again, I would like to reiterate, our ancestors were as intellectually astute as we are today. See, I'm not the one who's insulting our ancestors. It is the scientists, quote unquote, who are saying that this was just a way for our ancestors to understand stuff because they couldn't cope with nature. They were a people of nature. How could they not cope with nature? It's totally preposterous to suggest that, you know, thunder frightened them. What are you kidding me? Come on. And as we can read in most of these ancient texts, when all of a sudden the quote-unquote heavens opened and these very human-looking people descended and taught us in different disciplines and gave us specific instructions, and I'm told by professors that, oh, no, this didn't really happen. It only happened in our ancestors' heads, and it was a coping mechanism, then those professors are the ones who are insulting our ancestors, not me. Because nature does not give instructions. Never has, never will. And don't think twice about it that even if we're drunk or hopped up on whatever, we'll know if something actually happens or it goes on in our heads. We know that. And one thing that, you know, I have the privilege of working with a whole bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists, because I've always been, the one big argument was always, well, you know, all of these stories and pictures and carvings I'm about to show you are all a figment of our ancestors' imagination, just like I said, in order for them to cope with their environment. Which means that, you know, it's a thought that had to originate somewhere, and because I have colleagues in medicine, I asked them, I said, you know, is it possible for any, because the argument is that, you know, in this day and age, you know, I'm always told that, for example, stuff like this, these were just the comic strips of those days. And that would mean that we could apply the concept of comic books to that time period. Now, we would all have to agree that that's a weird argument. So then I asked, well, is it even possible for any of us to come up with concepts or ideas of that, let's say, 10,000 years ago? And the answer of every single psychologist that I've talked to is no. That every idea has a point of inception, of creation. That nothing can start from out of nothing. There had to have been a spark of inspiration, something that gave flight to an eventual story. And of course I'm aware that stories over time become embellished with stuff that never happened, but I don't care about that. What I care about is the origin, the actual core of what happened at the beginning.